Okay. Okay, it's time for Dr. Amy Baker to give us a few words of inspiration, and the keynote is going to happen now as well.
Okay, so I'm going to start with just a few words and thoughts, what I had originally called food for thought, because I thought I would be talking while you were eating. So Karen had asked me to be inspirational, which is not, I don't know how easy that's going to come to me. I don't know how inspirational I'll be, but I'm going to try. And so when I thought about being inspirational for this moment, I really thought about gratitude. My gratitude for being here and for Karen, and I just wanted to share some of that with you. So I'm very grateful that I get to be part of this process of education and your journey of healing. It's not that often that a researcher gets to stand in front of a group of people and be a part of this process with you. Usually, we're back in our offices writing boring journal articles and submitting them to, it's just the articles sit in a library somewhere, and you're sort of lucky if anybody cares about what you're writing. And here I have a blessing, I guess your curse is in a way my blessing that I get to be part of this process with you. And I hope that I can be a voice for you to stand in front of the professional community, the lawyers and the mental health professionals, and be your voice and try to convey to them what parental alienation is, to make this real for them. And Karen and I always joke. She's always thanking me, for what I'm doing. But honestly, I am thanking her because people call me every single day and say, I need help. Where do I go? I'm so alone. I'm so isolated. I'm so misunderstood. And I'm so grateful that Karen is here and that you are all here so that I can continue to connect people to your group. And it's my vision to have support groups like this all around the country. All right. So that's my gratitude. So I wanted to think a little bit about social support because that's in essence what ISNAF is, and I started to read a little bit about why social support. Why not just struggle alone in our own isolation being targeted parents? Why come together? What is the benefit of this? And so the literature is very clear that social support buffers people against the ill effects of stress, and I don't think anybody would argue that parental alienation is stressful, right? It doesn't make the bad things not happen, right? Social support doesn't stop the alienating parent from being an alienating parent, but it mitigates the negative effect. It makes it less bad for you as the targeted parent. And I've done some research on why should people read stories, other people's stories, about anything, and in this case, alienation. And so in the field, we talk about the 6 E's of therapy. Okay, so the first one is engagement. This is what I think you all are getting out of this, or these 6 E's. So the first one is engagement. And so there's this quote that we tell and listen to stories to reassure ourselves that we're not home alone. Our fear of isolation is instinctive and profound. Every story that we tell, and we've been hearing stories today, is evidence that somebody else is out there listening and going through this with us. The second E is empowerment. Hopefully, through this process of sharing and talking and learning, you will feel empowered. And again, I can't think of anything more disempowering than being a targeted parent where your kids are invalidating you and your ex is invalidating you, and then the mental health professionals and the attorneys and the judges are invalidating you and telling you that your experience is not real, right? So this is an opportunity to undo or mitigate that disempowerment. The third E is education. Hopefully you're learning concrete skills and strategies. You can hear, oh, so-and-so tried this, or that attorney's better than this one, or try this, or try that. So you can provide resources and education to each other. The fourth E, am I up to 4, is enhancement. So the idea is that we become enhanced as people by hearing all of this information that we're sharing with each other. Encouragement, I think that's sort of, we know how important it is when you feel so hopeless as a targeted parent, just to know that somebody maybe has been down that journey too, and they have some ideas, and then you can feel revitalized to go and continue the struggle. There's this wonderful Broadway show called Once on This Island. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but there's this incredible song, and I'm not going to sing it because I can't sing, but it's called Why We Tell Our Story. And when I was hearing it, and I was preparing for this, I couldn't think of anything that said it better, so I guess I'll just try to go through quickly. Life is why we tell the story. Pain is why we tell the story. Love is why we tell the story. Grief is why we tell the story. Hope is why we tell the story. Faith is why we tell the story. You are why we tell the story. All right, so I hope that you will tell the tale tomorrow. It will help your heart remember and relive. It will help you feel the anger and the sorrow, which is a lot of what this is about, and forgive for all the ones we leave, and we believe our lives become the stories that we weave. And so you all are weaving this story together, and I get to be a part of that. So I want to reflect for a moment on the momentous occasion here today of the installation of the first board of ISNAF, and I know that this work is built solidly on Karen's hard work and the hard work of everybody else here, and all the targeted parents who are here, and you're so brave to get out of bed every morning and deal with this horrible tragedy of alienation. And again, you know, your journey is the inspiration for the professionals. And I wanted to say, is there a weird face on that thing? Because it wasn't supposed to be. It's just supposed to be this cosmic thing here. So I'm very impressed by Karen's vision and ISNAF's vision and the direction and commitment and where you're all going. And, you know, we need ISNAFs everywhere. And I know, again, I'm just really excited and impressed with what you're planning. And I just wanted to end this little inspirational bit before I start my keynote with, you know, my vision. I have a vision too, and my wishes. And when I say wish, I mean not some passive, gee, I wish this happened, but things that I need to visualize. We need to have a vision to know what the next step is. So there's the quote, a man or a woman, when she wishes, is the master of her fate. So that's what I mean when I say a wish. This is what I hope that these are the directions that I think we need to be going in. Okay, so in terms of research, because I am first and foremost a researcher, we need more collaboration among researchers. We're all sort of toiling in our own isolation. I guess that's the theme of the day. There's very little cross-pollination among researchers. And we really need consensus about what the big questions are. You know, I have this vision of a research conference. I mean, it'd be so awesome. You know, a conference like this, but instead of targeted parents, that I could have my own conference with researchers where we could be talking about how to move the field forward. We need validation of measures, and this is something I'm going to talk about later. Right now, there is no definitive diagnostic tool for assessing alienation, either alienation strategies in the parent or the alienated child from an estranged child. We need more journals publishing this research. You know, I am a persona non grata at several of the key leading journals, academic journals in this field, because I reference Gardner. If Gardner is in your reference list, and I've been told, I'm sorry, you know, or if you put the S, the terrible, horrible S, the PAS, if you believe it's a syndrome, which I do, and I'm very public about that, and I write about that, there are certain journals where I will never get published, and that's very frustrating, because that means that everybody who's reading those journals isn't going to get that information. And we need foundations and grants foundations and governments to give us grants to do this research. Everything I do in terms of my parental alienation research, I do on the side. I'm not even allowed to do it at my job because it's controversial. It's all on the side, tucked away, unfunded. So anyway, that's my little gripe. All right. So next steps for prevention. Okay. We need consensus to diagnose parental alienation, right? And we need mandatory training for divorcing parents. I can't tell you how many times a targeted parent comes to me and says, well, now I see what this all was. When I first got divorced, sure, my ex badmouthed me, and sure, you know, they changed my child's last name so I wasn't included in things, and yes, I didn't always get the soccer schedule, but they're not connecting the dots until all of a sudden their kids said, drop dead. Right, so the real key here is to educate all divorcing parents about what the red flags are so they can get proactively involved and hopefully prevent it. All right, a little bit more here. We need mandatory critical thinking skills training for kids to help them resist the pressure to choose one parent, because in all of the things I'm going to talk about today, I think really changing the behavior of the alienating parent is like, you know, the lowest probability success rate that there's going to be, right? right? It's very, very hard. I have some ideas about how to incentivize alienating parents to behave, but that's not actually changing them. Or it's not changing their core beliefs, right? But I think if we can get to all kids whose parents are divorcing and teach them, you have a right to love both parents, you don't have to choose, and here's how you can step outside your kid's conflict. And again, I'm going to talk about that as I transition to the keynote. We need mandatory PAS training for mental health and legal professionals. Enough said, right? Okay, that's for prevention. Next steps for the legal forensic community. We need to streamline cases, right? Delay is the enemy of the targeted parent, right? And we need to figure out a way to streamline these cases so that the alienating parent and their attorney don't continue to just delay, which just gives the alienating parent the opportunity to entrench the alienation. We need judges to be less afraid to do the right thing. Are there any judges in the room? Okay, so now you get to hear what I have to say about judges. They're lazy cowards, okay? And this is what happens with a judge, and I tell this to targeted parents all the time. You can convince a judge that alienation is a factor in a case, but they still won't do anything. And this is what they will say. It's one of two things. Every judge will say one of two things. If you're successful at convincing them that alienation is actually going on, they'll say, okay, it's alienation, but the kids are doing so well. They're the captain of the hockey team, and they're getting A's, and they have friends. Let's not rock the boat. The kids are doing well. It can't be that bad. Or the judge will say, okay, it's alienation, but the kids are too fragile. They're vulnerable. They're not doing well. We can't rock the boat now. Why? Because judges are in love with the status quo. Because they believe that that's the path of least resistance. That's the safest path to take. So when I'm an expert witness, I believe that my job is it's the 1-2 punch. 1, pow, this is alienation, and 2, you need to do something. And so what I tell judges is doing nothing is a choice. Participating and supporting the status quo is participating in the abuse of a child. And we need to really get that message out to them. Okay. I think we also need to do some work in educating the attorneys for the alienating parents. And I actually did a legal training, and I asked them, when is vigorously advocating on behalf of your client participating in the abuse of a child? And I don't think they're used to thinking about that. You know, attorneys are just sort of one track, just go, just do what your client wants you to do. And their child is not their client. The child's not paying them, unless they're guardians and, for the kids. But I'm talking about the attorneys for the alienating parents. And we need to somehow rework their thinking so that they don't just go along with the alienation. And we need to do some work on the evaluators who are in love with the hybrid model. Okay, I have yet to read an evaluation report that doesn't sound like this. Okay, let's just say mom, but I know it works both ways. Mom is definitely doing some alienation. There's definitely some alienation going on. She's doing some bad mouthing and she's limiting contact and sort of like a cult, and the kids are all in mesh. But Dad, he's a little fussy with the laundry, so it's even. Right? They love the hybrid model where they get to just, spread the blame around as if being an alienating parent and being a slightly imperfect person, which, by the way, all parents are, we need to get them past that safety where they feel that it's acceptable to give everything equal weight, that being an alienating parent is no worse than having a tidy home or whatever the supposed imperfection of the targeted parent is. We need to move them along. In terms of legally, I think we need to clone Brian Ludmer. Anybody have any ideas about that? All that science fiction references, I'm thinking you're gonna create a clone at some point. We definitely need to take that energy for advocating on behalf of targeted parents and spread that around. Okay, next steps for treatment, proper diagnosis. And I think people have been saying all along, if you really know anything about alienation, you know the difference between an alienated and an estranged child. It's really not rocket science, but that information needs to be out there. We need more treatments for alienated children. And I'm going to talk about this in my keynote, which I'm going to transition to in a minute. You know, is everybody familiar with the 99 percenters, that, you know, this whole political movement that's going on, right? Well, I sort of think about that with alienation too, like probably not even 1% has the money and the resources and the judicial, you know, strength to get their kids and get their family court ordered to the Rachel House or Family Bridges, right? So what about the rest of us? What are the solutions that are available, all right? And then finally, in terms of next steps for treatment and my vision, obviously we need support groups in every county, in every state, so that nobody has to wake up alone with this and think, how am I going to get through the day with nobody understanding me? All right. So I apologize to the dog lovers in the room. I was looking for an image that I just thought was so sweet of social support, and it says, together we comfort each other, and in doing so we comfort ourselves. So, sweet, right? Okay, and again, if you can find a dog, two dogs hugging, I'll go with that, really. I have nothing against dogs. All right, so I'm gonna need a minute to switch my PowerPoints, because I didn't know I was going right from one to the other. So I'm going to move from gratitude to a talk. Karen and I were talking about, you know, why should I come out again and give the same talk? I feel like you deserve more than that, right? Right. And if you want that PAS primer, some of it is on a 1-hour video on my website that's free. Anybody can see it. All right. So I'm going to assume in this talk that you know the difference between an alienated and an estranged child, and you know the 17 primary parental alienation strategies, and we're going to start with that as a given. And so when Karen and I were talking, we were trying to figure out what's going on. What am I thinking about that I think maybe you would be interested in? And so that's what I'm going to talk about, is two major topics that are on my mind, all right? And hopefully this will be interesting. And I'm happy to take questions at any point. Okay, so the first big chunk of what I want to talk about is what's the scientific basis for PAS? And I'm going to get a little technical and boring with research stuff, so I tried to sprinkle in a lot of silly, cartoony type things. That's a good question. I have to think about it, okay? But probably by the end, because as I go through the slides, I just need to see if there's anything on there that I'm not comfortable sharing. But probably most, if not all of it, would be available. Okay, so why should you, as a targeted parent or a mental health professional, care about the science underlying PAS? You know it, you've lived it, right? So I've identified 3 reasons. I care because I'm a scientist, but why should you care? Well, when you're talking to mental health professionals and legal professionals, right, you need to know, yes, this is scientific, this is real, and we need to move beyond this whole discussion about whether it's junk science or not. You need to be comfortable talking about this, and this doesn't mean that you're going to be able to quote, you know, facts about face validity or error rate, but at least hopefully today you'll get some sense that this is real science that we're talking about, okay? And the other reason I wanted to give you this information is because there's a kind of parallel universe going on. Targeted parents are so marginalized by your kids and by your ex-spouses, or I should say the other parent of your child, and then you're sort of minimized in the professional world when you're trying to explain to your therapist or your attorney what's going on, and then they're, oh no, that's that junk science thing. So it's sort of the insult to the injury. All right, so I want to undo some of that. And I'm just sort of curious, trying to think of how to ask this. Are you interested in knowing about the scientific basis of this? I mean, do you sort of deal with PAS as junk science, but you don't really know how to answer that? Okay. All right, so let's do it. Okay, so first of all, I am a qualified scientist. Okay. Now, I did not make this picture. There's a website of people in the field who are, you know, mocked and treated as, you know, there's one of me as a Playboy bunny, and I'm called a court whore. But I thought that was a little racy, so I thought I would put this one up. So, okay, but I am actually a scientist. Okay, so let's talk about the criticisms, and I want to try to debunk some of them, okay? So the first point I want to make really is there are about 3 or 4 articles out there. One is by Carol Brudge, one is by Kathleen Fowler, and one is by somebody down, I forget her last name, her first name. These articles, none of which are written actually by scientists, okay? They're attorneys, there's commentators, they're not scientists. They're not people who actually were trained and conduct empirical research themselves. These 3 or 4 articles are filled with factual mistakes. Factual mistakes. I'm not talking about things you could sort of split hairs over or it's opinions. No, there's actually factual mistakes. So I want to just go through some of them. PAS is based on the assumption that if a child rejects the father, the most likely cause of the alienation is the mother. Okay, that is a factual mistake. PAS is not based on that assumption. It's based on the assumption that if a child rejects a parent, it might be alienation. Okay, nowhere did Gardner say every time a child rejects a parent, it must be alienation. So that is a factual mistake. Okay, Gardner has never tested his theory, and over the last decade, most of PAS's foundational assumptions have been disproven. Factual mistake. Okay, there's no research that's disproven any of this. PAS theory assumes that a woman who is assertive or self-protective is an alienator. Not true. Gardner never said that. I have come to the conclusion that the people who criticize Gardner have never actually read Gardner. And truly, I really believe that. If a child is alienated from one parent, it's the other parent's fault. Under Gardner's theories, women who complain or challenge a judge's ruling to place the child with an alleged abuser tend to be labeled as mentally ill. Okay? I've never seen any data on that point. Gardner coined the term parental alienation syndrome to describe his clinical impressions of cases he believed involved false allegations of child sexual abuse. Again, that's not true. His theory was related to observations of child sexual abuse, but he was very clear that sexual abuse allegations were not part of every PAS case. And yet the people who want to criticize Gardner are constantly trying to make it sound as if he created his theory to discredit child sexual abuse allegations. Okay. PAS shifts attention away from the dangerous behavior of the parent seeking custody to the custodial parent. This person who may be attempting to protect the child is presumed to be lying and poisoning the child. Okay, that is a factual mistake. Gardner was crystal clear, as I am when I give my talks, because I know what the prevailing myth is. So I am crystal clear, as was Gardner. If there's bona fide abuse or neglect, PAS is not applicable. Period, paragraph. Okay? So it would never be true that Gardner would shift attention away from the dangerous behavior. Okay? In recent years, the term PAS has been expanded to refer to all cases of visitation refusal, even if abuse is involved. Lie, not just a factual mistake, that one's a lie. Okay? On and on and on. In fact, I tried to take these articles and I went line by line, and almost every single line was a factual mistake. All right, so that's the first thing you should know, that anybody who says PAS is junk science, I shouldn't say anybody, but many of the people quote these articles as if they are authoritative research treatises that are debunking the theory, and they're not. Okay, the critics are also illogical. Not only are they wrong, but they're illogical because they love to, or they pay a lot of attention to these ad hominem criticisms of Gardner. He was a pedophile, he was a hired gun, he misrepresented his qualifications, he was self-published. By the way, none of these are true. But even if they were true, even if Gardner were a pedophile, it would not invalidate parental alienation system theory. The theory is not attached to the person, and it shouldn't be. He's the person who coined the term. But even if he were just the worst person in the world, which there's no evidence that he was, it would not really bear any weight. So here's just a funny little thing. I don't know if you can read it. Penguins are black and white. Some old TV shows are black and white. Therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. Okay? Logic. Another thing penguins aren't very good at. And this is what I feel like saying when I read these articles. Highly illogical. I don't mind arguing PAS theory, but there has to be some logic to it. It doesn't matter whether Gardner had a degree in X or Y, even though there's no evidence that all of the criticisms are even valid. All right? Okay. Okay, she deserves special mention. Janet Johnson is actually a researcher in that she does collect data and analyze it and write about her actual data. And on the one hand, she does actually talk about kids who sound a lot like alienated children. There's a lengthy page in one of her articles where she describes alienated children. And if you take Gardner's 8 behavioral manifestations, you can line it up point for point. They're wooden, brittle, using phrases borrowed from, lacking ambivalence, on and on and on. And so to that extent, she clearly sees alienation. But on the other hand, she's done an enormous amount of damage because she says that children should have their autonomy respected because PAS doesn't last more than a few years. What's the big deal? Right. Shocking. She also says that many targeted parents contribute to the rejection, and the most dangerous thing she said is that most cases are hybrid cases. What she refers to as a hybrid case is a case where the favored parent is doing some alienation, but the targeted parent is also imperfect and has contributed. Now, we don't know. We don't have any data about the proportion of cases in which there's visitation refusal are hybrid versus estrangement versus alienation, and that would be a great study. And if anybody wants to fund me to do it, I'll be happy to do that study. But even if it were true that most cases were hybrid cases, it doesn't mean that any particular case that's in front of a judge or a custody evaluator is a hybrid case. And what happens is the custody evaluators who come in with this philosophy that most cases are hybrid cases, it's like this mantra, most cases are hybrid cases. They then see every case in front of them as a hybrid case, okay? And that's a logical fallacy. It's an error in thinking that they're misapplying epidemiological data, or what they think is epidemiological data, because it's not, it's just a belief. They're applying this belief to the individual cases, and they're doing a tremendous disservice to the case that's sitting in front of them. Because as long as alienation is possible, they should be looking at that case as an individual case and saying, is this case a hybrid case? Not, well, most cases are hybrid, so this one is probably a hybrid. That is the laziest, sloppiest kind of thinking I can imagine. Okay, so my husband is Paul Fine, F-I-N-E. This is Paul Fink, F-I-N-K. One letter makes a difference, I will tell you. Okay, so this guy was the former president of the American Psychiatric Association. He's famous for coining the term, PAS is the worst sort of junk science I've seen in decades, or whatever that quote is. Everybody knows that, and it carries a lot of weight because he was the high up in the American Psychiatric Association. Okay, what most people don't know is he retracted that. Okay, May 2010, in a little journal called Clinical Psychiatry News, he wrote this nasty letter about how PAS is junk science. He actually said it again, and what he said was any person who supports the proposal for PAS to be in the DSM is nothing more than an abusive father who wants to be left alone to sexually molest their children. This is in writing. And many people from around the country, we all got together, we each wrote a letter picking apart a different section of his thing, and we forced him to retract it. He said, of course PAS exists, I'm just worried that if it's in the DSM it will get misused. I'm going to comment on that later. But even Paul Fink knows that this is real and it happens. I don't know, pro-torture? He's torturing targeted parents, right? Okay, so here's some other, yes?
What's the motivation of these lawyers, psychiatrists, saying these symptoms doesn't exist? I mean, why do they, I don't understand why somebody would say
That's an interesting question. What's the motivation for the deniers? Well, there's the whole feminist, maybe we'll get to that a little bit later, all right? I'm a little worried I'm going to get sidetracked. And I don't think there's just one motivation, but it's a good question. I think, there's some research in how hard it is for people to shift their paradigm, right, to shift their thinking. So this is going to require a paradigm shift for people to be open to this possibility here. So other flawed thinking that I've heard from well-respected people, it exists, but it's not a syndrome, okay? So I don't know what definition of syndrome they're using, but most dictionaries, a syndrome is a collection or a constellation of symptoms with a common etiology, okay? That's what a syndrome is. I've actually heard somebody say it's a syndrome, but calling it that will harm children. Okay, Peter Jaffe, who's very well known in the domestic violence industry, we were debating at an AFCC conference, and he actually said, we should put information about PAS on every cereal box. We should, of course it exists, everybody knows about it, we should make that information available, but we can't put it in the DSM because we'll stigmatize children. Because when they grow up, they'll have to fill out I swear to God, he said this, because it's so out there. When they have to fill out a job application, they will be stigmatized because they'll have to admit that they had a childhood mental illness. Okay, so raise your hand if as an adult you filled out a job application where you had to say whether you had a childhood diagnosis. I'm like, what job? What? But the other reason why that's so illogical is because what does a therapist do with an alienated child when they want to get reimbursed by insurance? Do they say, oh gee, there's no PAS diagnosis, so I guess I won't get paid? Or do they thumb through the DSM and they go, oh, adjustment disorder, it's good enough, right? The kids are getting diagnosed anyway. It's just not as specific or as helpful a diagnosis. So this is just totally, illogical in my opinion. Okay, and then there are the people who say, okay, it might be a syndrome, but alienated children shouldn't be forced to reconcile, right? This is the cure is worse than the disease argument, and I say, I think my book hopefully puts that to rest. The disease is pretty bad, that's my point. PAS is Gardner's theory, okay, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, about the mountain of research and other theories that are supporting this. It's not just Gardner. PAS isn't valid because it's not in the DSM, okay? When was the last time the DSM was updated? Does anybody know? Of course, you guys know. 12 years ago? I think it was more, and they closed the book on including new diagnoses well before that. All right, and people don't know this. The National Heart Association, they come up with they tweak some new thing, and they have like a new protocol, and it's in the book, like every couple of months they're updating it. The DSM, every 10 or 20 years, right? Okay. Then there are the people who say, well, the APA doesn't accept it. And when you say, well, what does the APA stand for? A lot of them think it's the American Psychological Association, and then you have to educate them that it's not the American Psychological Association's job to thumbs up or thumbs down syndromes. That's not what they do. People think that's what they do, and so the fact that they haven't done that for PAS makes people think that, oh, of course, PAS doesn't exist. Okay, and then there's just the simple lazy, well, everybody's discredited it. Okay, so all of this is nonsense. It's all ideologically driven. Okay, it's not science. That's my point. What the committee that wrote the proposal to get PAS in the DSM is asking for is the diagnosis of the child. Okay, when a child is alienated as opposed to estranged, they adopt these false beliefs and false feelings about a parent that is harmful to them and is not based in reality. So in that sense, it could be conceived as a mental disorder. So we're not, you're not, some people then say, well, then why punish the child? It's the parent who's doing the bad thing. But think about it again logically. If somebody is exposed to a carcinogen and they get asbestosis, you still want a medical diagnosis, or that person has a cancer, we need to treat the cancer. That doesn't let the chemical company off the hook, right? There's no relationship between who gets the diagnosis and who's to blame for the problem, all right? Is there any other comments about this? Okay, so I know this is going through it sort of fast and it's a little cursory, but at least you should have some sense that a lot of the criticisms of PAS are utter nonsense, okay? So now I want to drill down a little bit. What does the science say? Okay, so I've identified at least 7 bodies of evidence that support the existence of PAS, only one of which is empirical research, and I'm going to talk about some of those studies. Okay, but the first thing is there's a mountain of research on children of divorce completely separate from the literature on PAS. The people who did these studies, maybe they never even heard of PAS, who knows what their opinion is about it, but the research literature is very clear. Divorce is not good for kids overall, that kids of divorce as a group do a little bit worse on lots of social, emotional, developmental outcomes than kids of parents who are not divorced, but that it's not the divorce per se that's bad for kids. It's when the parents involve the children in interparental conflict. That's the bad part. That's the bad seed inside the divorce that's associated with negative outcomes for kids. All right, so that's a whole body of research, well respected in major journals, that supports the essence of parental alienation, that's completely aside from those of us in the field, okay? Then there are these clinical accounts of alienation that have been written about for decades. You talk to any family systems person, anybody here trained by Mnuchin or in that, doing that kind of work, anybody. Okay, Salvador Mnuchin, basically created structural family systems work. They've been talking about this stuff for decades, okay? Intergenerational alliances, when one parent joins with the child and sabotages the relationship, or cross-generational boundaries where the parent and the child are ganging up against the other parent, triangulation, where 2 sides of the triangle are excluding the other side. This is old news to them, all right? And all of that writing supports the theory underlying parental alienation syndrome. And they don't care about Gardner and whether he was it's totally separate, all right? That's my point. Okay. A third whole body of knowledge that supports parental alienation are media accounts. Now, there's this guy, Richard Stevens. Does anybody know about him? He did this historical review of newspapers that go back at least 100 years. And what he did was identify dozens upon dozens of stories of parents saying things like, "My beloved children won't talk to me anymore. Help, my ex is turning the kids against me." All right? Then there are the memoirs written by the parents who were going through this, very convincing individual case studies of parents who started out having a relationship with their children and then through the machinations of their ex and the court system end up losing their kids. Pamela Richardson's book, The Kidnapped Mind, is one of many. There are dozens of these books out there. And I don't think up until support groups like this started, they all thought they were the only one. In fact, I had lunch with Pamela not that long ago, and she was like, "Well, I think my book might be the only one." I was like, there's a lot of books. A lot of parents have gone through this. Okay, another source of evidence for parental alienation theory is a study I did of custody evaluators, the people on the front line who've been doing this work, trying to figure out what's going on in contested custody cases. I asked them, is it possible for a child to be turned against a parent by the other parent? That's the essence of parental alienation, right? When the rejected parent was not abusive or neglectful. 100% said that, of course, this happens. We can quibble about how many of the cases this happens. Does the targeted parent play a role? Should it be in the DSM? I'm not saying there's a consensus among custody evaluators about much, or what tools they should use. There's no agreement about that. But is it possible for a parent to turn a child against the other parent when that rejected parent did nothing to be rejected? Yes. And then there's a whole set of research studies and clinical writings by therapists who take as a given that parents are manipulating their children to reject the other parent. And then they're saying, well, I've taken 10 cases of alienation and now I'm going to look at something else. So again, that's supporting it, okay? And the final one is a set of studies that were designed to specifically, explicitly look at some aspect of alienation. And if you'll see that my name is up there a lot, it's because I'm slogging away at this. In fact, I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I'm not the only one doing this research, all right? And each one of these, except for one which is under review, has been published in a peer-reviewed journal. It's gone through the process. It's been considered scientific. And every one of these takes one element of a question about alienation and examines it. And the data has consistently supported the theory that, yes, it's possible for kids to be manipulated to reject one parent who does not deserve to be rejected. Okay. Now I'm treading a little bit dangerously, so the lawyers I invite you to jump in at any point. But so what I just went through was my interpretation of what the science says. But you know, as a targeted parent who's going to court, what matters is, what does the law say? Does the law say that this is science? So the reason there's a fingerprint there is because one of the first cases that talked about what is science and what kind of science gets into the court had to do with whether fingerprinting evidence was admissible. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there's two major Supreme Court decisions that determine what science gets into the courtroom. And one is the Frye decision and the other is the Daubert decision. And some states are Frye states and some states are Daubert states because this is not federally decided upon. And in the Frye decision, the relevant quote is that expert testimony must be based on scientific methods that are sufficiently established and accepted. And then Daubert took that a little bit further and said that the research has to be reliable, reliably applied, and that the knowledge must be gained through the scientific method. Okay? So now I'm going to tell you what the scientific method is, and then we're going to backtrack and look at the PAS research and connect it up. Okay, so the first thing is, this is what the scientific method is not. It's not hunches, it's not intuition, it's not clinical wisdom, it's not practice as usual, it's not unsystematic observations, it's not guesswork or superstition, religion, divine inspiration, gossip, dreams, or preconceived fixed ideas. A little humor about a hunch. Sometimes, my dear Watson, you just have to follow a hunch. Okay, might be good for solving a case, but it's not science. Coincidence. Oh, is that the cutest? Okay, but coincidence nonetheless. Divine inspiration. Okay, so that's what science is not. What science is, the process of formulating hypotheses and then conducting empirical experiments to prove, and I was trained to say that you never prove anything. Your data either supports or refutes the theory, but this is the quote that I got. To prove or falsify the hypothesis. You say, gee, I think this is what the truth is, and then you actually conduct a study and you see whether your data supports that idea or not. But it goes further. The science must be subject to peer review and publication. There has to be a known or potential error rate. Okay? I'm going to skip over a little bit of that. And the theory and technique that is generally accepted by the relevant scientific community. Okay, and just so you know that I know what I'm talking about, that's my book. It's called Research Methods in Child Welfare, and it was published by Columbia University Press. All right. So the first element of the scientific method is it must be falsifiable. It's not science if you can't test it. So an unfalsifiable hypothesis would be all swans are white. Why is it unfalsifiable? Because you couldn't possibly look at every single swan. Martians are nice. That's another example of an unfalsifiable hypothesis because We don't know if they're nice because we don't have any way of testing their niceness, okay? Okay, but I conclude PAS is a falsifiable theory. There are falsifiable hypotheses that have been or could be tested. So it meets that first definition of being generated from a scientific method. Okay, and here are examples of hypotheses that have been tested or could be tested. Formerly alienated children will report the experience was harmful. We can find that out. Children can be manipulated to reject a non-abusive parent. We can answer that question. Alienating parents employ parental alienation strategies to foster the child's rejection. I've studied that. Alienated children exhibit the 8 behavioral manifestations of PAS. We know that. Okay? So the second aspect of the scientific method is reliability of measures. This is like research science 101. They always show the bullseye, and what that means is that there's no error in a measure. Okay? There's 4 types of reliability. I'm not going to bore you. Okay? But in some of the PAS research that's been conducted, reliability has been established. I'll just give you 2 examples. I did a study where 40 kids, 20 of whom were alienated, 20 were not, were given a paper and pencil measure, and I talked about this last year too, but I've now doubled my sample. And I had the kids answer questions about both their parents, like, one thing I like about my mom is, one thing I like about my dad is, and what I wanted to be able to do was code their responses, and I didn't know who was alienated and who wasn't, as these kids are exhibiting the 8 behaviors of alienation and these kids are not, all right? So I had me and somebody else who knew nothing about nothing. Let me tell you, he was a student who just was hanging around for the summer. He didn't know anything about parental alienation. We each coded each of these 40 questionnaires, alienated, not alienated, based on a coding system that I developed, and we agreed 95% of the time. That's known as inter-rater reliability. 2 people can independently look at the same data and come to the same conclusions. Okay? I'm going to skip that. Okay, so that's reliability of measures. The next aspect of the scientific methods that's relevant is the validity of measure. Is the measure measuring what it's supposed to? You could have a very reliable measure, but it's measuring something else. I have a very reliable measure of anxiety. It happens to be measuring depression. Okay, so that's not good. You want a measure that's both reliable and it's measuring what it's supposed to. There's 6 kinds of validity. I'm going to skip over them, but I'm going to tell you that in the PAS research that's been conducted, I've gone through the studies and I've established that validity has been established in these studies. Okay, and as an example, I did a study where I gave adults this measure called the BSQ, the Baker Strategies Questionnaire. It's asking them their exposure to the 17 primary parental alienation strategies. When you were a kid, did your parents do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? So they answered all of that, and then they also answered questions about their adult attachment style. Substance abuse, whether they completed college or not, their self-esteem, all the things that I looked at in my book that I determined were valid relationships between alienation and these outcomes through my interviews. I basically replicated that entire study but using valid measures and reliable measures, and what I found were these very strong relationships. Kids who said that they were exposed to more alienation had lower self-esteem, more problems being self-sufficient, more alcohol problems, problems with their adult relationships, much more depression. Okay, so that's what's known as validity. Okay, error rate, I'm going to skip that for a minute. So here's a study. Error rate means that you can correctly classify cases. So I'm going to go back to that study where I had 20 alienated kids and 20 kids who were not alienated. So your measure should be able to correctly classify who's alienated and who's not alienated. And so in this study, that this paper was just accepted for publication, we had 19 kids who were sent for reunification therapy for being alienated. 18 of the 19 were coded as being alienated based on their responses. And you know what, you look at these pieces of paper, it's so obvious. You ask these kids, tell me one thing you like about dad, if dad is the rejected parent. Nothing, capital, exclamation point, exclamation point. Tell me one thing you like about mom. Everything. She's the bestest mommy in the whole world. I'm telling you, these kids, nobody would have a hard time with this, okay? These kids are wildly different. Okay, another aspect of the scientific method that the judges care about is peer review. You can't just do a study and say, I have some interesting data, I'm going to share it with the world. That's not the way science works. You have to put your paper through the blind peer review process. That means you take your name off it and any identifying information and you send it to a journal and they send it out to 3 people who don't know who you are and you don't know who they are, and because I'm a blind reviewer for journals, so I know how it works, and I've had my stuff reviewed, all right? And then they get together and they independently, and then the editor gets together and reads all the reviews and tells you, is this paper representing good science or not, all right? And then if it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, it's abstracted in this database called PsycInfo, and again, that's all part of the Daubert standard of being scientifically accepted. Okay, so there's my image of the peer review process. A friendly bunch. And because you don't know who they are and they don't know who you are, for some of them it's a point of pride, like how nasty can they be? All right. Or another version, there's the poor academic running down the final mile with people ready to beat him. But all of those articles, if you think back a couple slides where I listed, there were 18 articles, each of them presenting a piece of parental alienation systems theory. Each of them was accepted into a peer-reviewed journal, all right? So the conclusion is there are 18 empirical studies explicitly about PAS, so I'm not talking about divorce or some tangential part of PAS theory, specifically about parental alienation or parental alienation syndrome, each with a testable hypothesis, each with adequate reliability and validity, each with adequate, or sometimes it's not applicable to talk about an error rate, and each published in a peer-reviewed journal, all right? So recently I participated in what's known as a Daubert hearing, where I was hired as an expert witness and the other side didn't want me to testify, so they said, well, PAS is junk science, and we had to stop everything and have this whole hearing about whether PAS is or is not junk science. I don't expect you to read, oh, you can read it. Boy, it's better than here. Anyway, you can see the judge said that parental alienation is a subject generally accepted by the relevant mental health community. The research applied the accepted scientific methodology. The work has been subject to peer review and testing is available. Period, paragraph, right? And anybody, I'm happy to share this little piece of paper with any attorney to spare them, hopefully, having to go through this. Okay, but the work is not done, right? Science is an iterative process. We're constantly revising and refining theory, and there's a lot more work to be done, so this is just the never-ending cycle of theory, prediction, experiment, and observation. That if you're a scientist, you love this. You're happy that there's always more work to do. All right? Okay, so I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to talk about what about the rest of us? Right? We don't have uniform child abuse laws in this country. Every state has their own definition of child abuse. There's nothing uniform, right? So I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how to have a uniform Supreme Court decision. I don't see that happening. Well, there are limits to our fundamental rights to raise a child if we're abusive, and that's what the alienating parent says. That's their trump card. Oh, it's not me. I want Johnny to visit Mom, but she's abusive, and then everything grounds to a halt. Right. It's very hodgepodge. It's all cobbled together. And you know what? Just because this judge said this, I would not be surprised if in the same county, another judge would say, oh, no, PAS is junk science. I don't want to hear it. They don't, I don't know the answer to that. Is there another attorney here who wants to throw out a possible solution to this problem? But how they define emotional abuse is different from state to state.
From state to state.
Right.
At the federal level, it's uniform. State to state is different.
Right. Right, even when right, that's why I was saying earlier, it's a two-part problem. First, you need to convince them alienation is real and it's present in this case, and then you need to get them off their duff to actually do something about it. You know what we need is like a listserv or something where people can share these kind of tips. And I mean, I often tell people, don't fight the battle and lose the war. If PAS, if that S is going to sink you, if the S is for sinking your case, don't go there, right? But even sometimes when the targeted parent doesn't talk about the other side, oh, they're talking about Gardner's thing and that's junk science, and the other side will bring it up. But what you all need is a way to share your strategies with each other about how to deal with this. So how do you tease apart the effects of the emotional abuse from PAS? Well, I can say that in some of my research where I've had a large enough sample, there's statistical ways to control for things. So I can say, are alienation strategies harmful to kids over and above physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse? And the answer is yes. If you have a large enough sample and you measure all of those things. But in the study that I was talking about with the 20 kids who were alienated and the 20 who weren't, they were all from high conflict divorces, all of them. And all of the kids were sent to services. The only difference was alienation versus not alienation. I mean, I don't mean only difference, but that's a big difference. But what you saw, the not alienated kids from a high conflict divorce sent for therapy did not have that extreme, irrational lack of ambivalence and worshiping one parent and vilifying the other that the alienated kids had. That's what differentiated them. I can't think of one good thing about that parent. We asked them, what's one thing you like about that parent? What's one memory you have? What's one thing that parent is good at? Nothing, nothing, nothing. That's what really differentiates them. That's estrangement. Realistic rejection of a parent is what we call estrangement. And that can be because they're abusive, neglectful, or abandon the child. Some parents can say, I'm not really interested in raising my kids, and then they come back 5 years later and the kids are angry at them. That's not alienation, that's estrangement. Okay? Right. But the behaviors of the child. I mean, I tend to use a 4-point system. If I'm hired as an expert on a case, and I'm not a clinician, so I don't interview people or observe them, I say, was there a prior positive relationship between the child and the now rejected parent before the divorce? So if the answer is yes, that's one check in the alienation category. What? I'm doing a review of documents. But forget about how I determine that. This is, okay? The second is there evidence that the favored parent is using the 17 primary parental alienation strategies? If there's yes, then you put that in the alienation as opposed to estrangement category. Is the rejected parent absent abuse or neglect or radical incompetence? If the answer is yes, that parent is absent those things, that's the third check for alienation. And the fourth is the child exhibiting the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation? If you have yes, 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 there is a good relationship, no, that parent's not abusive or neglectful, the favored parent's doing that alienation thing, and the kids are acting like alienated kids, that's alienation, not estrangement. And that's how you say, no, my kids aren't rejecting me because I did something. My kids are not estranged from me. My kids are alienated. That's the differential. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to move on, and I still think there'll be plenty of time for more questions. Okay, so current topic 2. So the first one was, is PAS sound science? And this is sort of loosely labeled, what about the rest of us? Okay. What solutions are available for those who cannot afford or do not win the right to participate in Family Bridges, which is Richard Warshak and Randy Rand's program in Texas, or the Rachel House, which is the Hoax program in Texas, and or do not want individual or dyadic therapy for alienated children? He's in California, but Richard's in Texas, and so the program, okay. But thank you, fine correction. Randy and Deirdre are in Northern California. Okay, so first I want to just remind you, because you probably all live this and you all know, why is individual or dyadic therapy so bad for kids? Because this is what the judge is going to want to give you. Even if you convince them that there's alienation, they love individual therapy, dyadic therapy. Okay, so dyadic means the targeted parent and the kid, individual means the kid alone. Okay, so there's at least 7 reasons. Tell me if I missed any, okay? So reason number one, the therapist is going to join, that's a social work term, join with the child against the targeted parent, because that's what social workers are trained to do. They're trained to join with their clients. That means see things from the perspective of their client. If they don't do that, it's very hard to have a therapeutic alliance and do any therapeutic work. So they're oriented to that. And these kids are very compelling, they're very convincing, they're crying crocodile tears. My mother did this and that, and she's horrible, and I hate her. And all you have is that kid alone with you, you're gonna join with them. Okay? If it's dyadic therapy, one of the problems is there's no opportunity for the targeted parent to actually function as a parent. So if you go back to Brian's 4 things, and I might have you remind me, it was consequences and guidance and... Okay, guidance, boundaries, incentives, and consequences. Could you do that if you were in therapy with your kids 1 hour a week? You have no power. You're a client in that room. You're 1 down, you're 10 down, right? As the parent in the room with your kids spitting fire at you. You're in no position to function as a parent. So it can't really repair the relationship and put you back in that parental role. There's zero opportunity to actually build positive memories, which is what you need to undo the alienation, is to remind the child, hey, this parent's not such a monster. But there you are in the room, the therapist is in charge. Kids really don't like therapy, right? You know any kid who goes, bring on more therapy, I want another hour a week, right? Kid, you're dragging them there, kicking and screaming. That's not, how is that going to repair the relationship, right? I think there's 168 hours a week, correct me if I'm wrong. So if you have 1 hour a week of therapy, and what I ask is, if you tried to deprogram somebody from a cult, would you take them out of the cult an hour a week and then put them back in? I mean, it's absurd, right? It doesn't work. Okay. And I think another problem with therapy for alienated kids is that just knowing that Wednesdays at noon is your therapy, the run-up to that, starting probably Monday, the alienating parent starting to rev the kid up to go in and make the case. I actually think therapy makes it worse. So the caveat is if you have a really talented therapist who really gets alienation, maybe they can do it, okay? So I'm not saying all therapists doing this are bad, but the whole system is designed to actually entrench the alienation. The kid has to come in and justify their horrible behavior. Why are they rejecting that parent? That parent is so horrible, right? So they get all worked up. Okay. By involving the targeted parent and the child in the treatment, structurally, the alienating parent is off the hook, right? If they did something wrong, they'd have to be in that room too, sweating it out, right? But they're not. They drop the kid off, they go shopping, they come back, the targeted parent's on the hot seat, the alienating parent's free pass, right? So what's the message the kid's getting? Who's the problem parent here? The one in the room with them, right? And if by a miracle it should work, what will the alienating parent do? Stop bringing the kid to therapy. And they'll probably turn the kid against the therapist, right? So if it doesn't work, the alienating parent will keep the kid going, and if it does work, they're going to sabotage the therapy. So that gives it zero chance, right? So this is, I hate to tell you, because this is what the judges love doing, but I don't put much stock in this. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is what I call a 3-part solution. Some of this you've heard before, some of this is new, but I hope it's all interesting. So the first part, I need my notes for this. Okay. So the first part has to do with this concept of going beyond the high road, and I'm going to talk about that. The second part has to do with teaching kids critical thinking skills, and then the third part is a carrot and stick program to incentivize the alienating parent to behave. Okay, going beyond the high road. If I had a nickel for every time a parent told me that they're taking the high road, I would be rich, okay? The problem with the high road is it does not tell parents what to do, it just tells them what not to do. So they're like this, they're like straitjacketed. I'm not supposed to do this, I'm not supposed to do that, I don't want to be a rotten person like that other person, I don't want to sink down into the mud like them, so I guess I'll just... And what happens is, targeted parents who are taking the high road, when they think the high road means don't badmouth the other parent, which is, I think, what people think it means most of the time, one of two things happens. They either become passive and depressed and helpless, and the kid thinks, yeah, Dad's right, Mom's a drag, she's crying and moping around all the time. Or they become angry and reactive and fight with their kids all the time, and the kid thinks, gee, Mom's right, Dad's, all he does is yell at me. So either way, the targeted parent's participating in their own alienation. You're like digging your own grave, taking that high road. Okay, that's where the high road's taking you. Nowhere good. Okay, there you are walking in a landmine. Okay, so what does it mean to take the high road, to go beyond the high road? Okay, so first of all, I am not saying get down in the dirt and sling mud at the other parent. So I agree with that aspect of the high road, okay? But I want to give you some ideas about what to do. So the first thing to do is to understand the alienation from the child's perspective. What's hooking them into this? Because alienating parents, and you've heard me say this before, they're evil geniuses. They know exactly how to lock their kids in. And it's not exactly the same for every kid. Some are there because they've been so flattered and over-empowered, and they've been sort of seduced into this parentified pseudo-parent, confidant, mate of their parent. Okay, that's one scenario. The other is they're terrified of losing the love. Another is they're afraid the alienating parent's going to fall apart because they're so fragile and vulnerable and lonely. Oh, poor mommy, she's so lonely when I'm with Dad. I have to stay. Dad's strong. He can handle it if I don't go with him, but I have to stay home and take care of Mom. So you have to understand the alienation from the child's point of view. Okay? If you don't know what you're dealing with. Okay? So the alienating parent's job is to make you fight with your kids. That's their job. They want to create conflict. They want to incite conflict between you and your child. They do it by telling your child you're stealing their college money. Even 4-year-olds, I swear to God, you stole my college money. And you're like, it's college. I don't know, but you did something bad. All right? So your job is to not take the bait, but to be empathic with your child. Okay, and see, this is showing you something magical happens between your brain and your child's brain when you're empathic with them. You're forging this powerful connection. All right, so what this means is you might think that your job as the targeted parent is to correct the mistaken idea that your child has about you. My child thinks I stole their college money. My job is to correct their misperception, and then they won't be alienated. Guess what? They don't really care about the college money, right? You could show them that bank statement. Here it is, right here. And what do? They don't care, right? Your job is to be empathic. So this is what you should say, in my opinion. You must be so hurt and angry that you think I took your college money. Wow. That must really, really not feel good. Because that's what kids will remember from the interaction. Not, oh, I'm so glad I have $23,000 in a 401k, right? There's no meaning. College is going to be paid for. They don't care about that. What they remember is the feeling of the relationship. And so your job as the targeted parent is to be loving and safe and available as much as you can, and to not take the bait and fight with your kid. Okay? So in terms of going beyond the high road, I highly recommend John Gottman's work on emotion coaching, helping kids label their feelings. There's a lot of research that shows that kids whose parents label emotions for them, that must make you feel sad or angry or hurt or upset, whatever it is. Those kids, they're better able to regulate their own emotions. And so another way to think about alienation is the alienating parent wants to incite this, as I said, conflict, drama, and trauma in your relationship with your kid. So by using emotion coaching, you're actually helping your child regulate themselves, soothe themselves, calm themselves down, and that can help you manage all of the ups and downs of being a targeted parent with an alienated child. Okay? That's supposed to be somebody being strategic. Okay, I'm not sure I get that, but anyway, okay. Everything you do, you have to think, how is this going to be used against me by the other parent, and what will this look like to the courts? Everything. It's not fair, it's not right. Alienating parents have a free pass, right? Do they follow court orders? Nah. Do they do all sorts of horrible things? Sure. Are they abusive, neglectful, horrible, disgusting, a lot of them? Does anything bad happen? Are there any consequences for the alienating parent? No, it's totally unfair. But one of the things I tell targeted parents is, suck it up. It's a very technical term. You have to always be thinking, how is this going to look to my kid? Okay, so that's what I mean by being strategic. Okay, I'm going to talk about critical thinking skills a little bit later, but that's just a little humor. Okay, just go to www.criticalthinking.com and click on the answers. Okay, so that's not critical thinking skills. Okay, parental alienation strategies, the 17 strategies, erode children's critical thinking skills. And what happens is the alienating parent is writing over, if you can think of it as like a computer, the child's thoughts and feelings and memories and ability to be rational. They're imposing false beliefs and false ideas about the targeted parent onto this child. And if you can help kids think critically, what is that idea? Where did that come from? Am I biased? Am I free to change my mind? If you can help kids develop critical thinking skills, you can help prevent the erosion of them that will ultimately lead to their alienation. Okay, and there's, hello, what's my thoughts in my brain? It's not something we're used to doing, especially kids. You know, they just think their thoughts are just like truths, right? But it's not. These thoughts come from someplace, and some of them are valid thoughts, and some are not. Okay, who can name the cookie? What's that cookie? If we're talking about sparking sense memories. First, it's a Madeline, that's right. Or a Madeline? Madeline. Okay, so why? Why do we spark sense memories? Okay. Inside the alienated child, this is what I believe, is a loving child who wants and needs the love of the targeted parent. That child is encased in a brittle shell of arrogance, entitlement, hostility, and rejection. Does that sound familiar? Okay, and it's your job as the targeted parent to see through the hard exterior to the child inside. And I'm going to talk about the cookie in a minute. But first I want to give you another useful metaphor, or a metaphor that might be useful. Okay, who's read The Runaway Bunny? Okay, everybody know that book? Everybody knows that book, right? Right? Everybody know that book? Okay. It's a children's book. The little bunny wants to run away. Okay. The baby bunny, in the absence of alienation, I don't think the mommy and daddy bunny were having a divorce conflict, okay? In the absence of alienation, the baby bunny is exploring the notion of separating from the mommy. And rather than become angry or disappointed or threatened, the mommy bunny joins the child's fantasy and assures her baby that no matter where he goes or who he becomes, she will always love and accept him, okay? And I think that's a useful metaphor, that no matter how rejecting your child is, your job is to be steadfast in your love for your child and say, no matter what, I will love you, okay? So the important task for the targeted parent is to emotionally connect with the child that I believe is trapped inside the alienation. So one of the metaphors that I think of is the Russian nesting dolls. Do you know those dolls, the little tiny doll inside the bigger doll? So the tiny little chip, a little smidge of wood that's in the inner of this nesting doll, that's your child who still loves you. And everything else is the false beliefs, the false ideas, the false feelings, the arrogance, the entitlement, the brittle wooden shell of alienation, okay? So your job is to talk to that child who's trapped inside there. So there are thoughts and feelings and memory inside the child's mind that are deeper than the alienation. If you had a good relationship with your child prior to the alienation, then those experiences can still be in there. And so I think of the alienation as a dark shroud covering the child's love for you, the targeted parent. So your job is to get under that cover somehow of the alienation and bypass the child's manipulated thinking and speak directly to the child inside. Okay, so how do you do that? So Marcel Proust, right, he wrote, The smell and taste of things remain poised a long time, ready to remind us of things past. Okay, so there's this phenomenon of sense memories that are inside all of our minds. Have you ever had that experience where you smell something and you're like, wow, that takes me back to freshman year of college when I was sitting in this door and I had this whole memory can come flooding back to you, right? From a single smell or a single taste. So that's what this book is about. The first 45 pages of Remembrance of Things Past is Marcel Proust, or the character, just eating a single cookie, and it just takes him back to a whole part of his childhood that he thought he had forgotten. So you as the targeted parent, and this has actually been borne out by research, you can expose people to certain smells and it will take them back and they'll have these memories that they say they had no access to consciously. So you can use this knowledge to your advantage somehow, or just think of it as a tool in your toolkit, to use that tired metaphor, right? So if you used to bake chocolate chip cookies with your child and that was a ritual that you always had, well, if your child's coming to visit, why not have your house smell like chocolate chip cookies? Or if you have a certain perfume or a certain smell that you think your child will associate with you, spray that perfume on the letter and send it to your child. This is what parents whose kids are in cults do. They find ways to get under the cover and speak to the inner part of the child that you can't control it. The child, I don't want to have that memory. They smell the smell and it instantly brings them back. Okay, I'm going to move along. I don't think we have a firm answer on at what age alienation can take hold, and I think it's because there's a lack of specificity as to what does it mean to take hold. Does it mean to have a negative reaction in the moment, or does it mean to remember and know that you're supposed to hate one parent when you really don't hate them? Well, there are truisms about development too, about what the brain can and cannot manage. So here's a little Proust humor, in case you thought there was no Proust humor. Monsieur Proust, we would like to talk to you about product placement for one of our cakes. Okay, the Madeline's the most famous cookie ever. Okay, so here's another piece of going beyond the high road. So many targeted parents feel as if they're in a battle against the alienating parent, right? You're constantly fighting with them, and to make matters worse, the child always joins in with the alienating parent, right? So no matter what, I want you to study flute, and the other parent says, no flute, and the kids, of course the flute's the stupidest instrument. So you're always fighting with your kid, okay? So one thing that I recommend is to really try to instill in the child an idea of what they want their life to be. What are your goals and dreams for your life? Because if the child can own it for themselves, then they're going to be less likely to give it up for the alienating parent, okay? And so I tell targeted parents, talk to your kids about college, because what do alienating parents live in fear of? Their kids separating, right? They want to hang on to these kids, and go to community college, live at home forever, have no life of their own. So if you can, as a targeted parent, instill in your child an idea that one day they'll be separate, and they're going to have a life and a career and a family. And if that can take hold inside the child, then you're helping your child. And you're not doing it to punish the alienating parent. You're doing it because it's the right thing for your child. Okay, so the next aspect of going beyond the high road is, trying to problem solve with your child, not seeing your child as a problem. Okay, so when successful, parental alienation strategies incite conflict, as I said, between the child and the targeted parent. The more conflict and tension there is, the less likely that it is that the child will want to spend time with that parent. So a suggestion for reducing conflict is for the targeted parent to engage the child in mutual problem solving. And I know this is sort of like parent education 101, but I'm telling you, targeted parents get stuck in these power struggles with their kid. I said bedtime's 9:30. No, I said, and all they're doing is fighting with their kid. So what I recommend is mutual problem solving. Gee, we have a problem. You want to go out before you clean your room, and I want you to clean your room before you go out. How are we going to solve this problem? And so instead of you and the alienating parent fighting, and the kid's on the side with the alienating parents, right? So you're fighting against the alienating parent and the kid. You put yourself on the side of the kid. Gee, we have a problem. You want to do it this way? I'm not so sure. How can we solve this problem? All right, so I call that the magic we. because then your child feels like you're on their side. And it doesn't mean you say yes to any cockamamie idea they come up with, but if it's like reasonable, if it's in the universe of reasonable solutions, I tell targeted parents, go with it, okay? Because it's what alienating parents can't do. They're not empathic problem solvers, right? So the kid will appreciate that you're doing this. Okay, another aspect of going beyond the high road is not taking it personally. This is hilarious, but I don't know if you can read it. Oh, no. I don't even know what it says specifically, but it's like, I'm still standing in line staring at the stupid head of this stupid man. So this poor guy, I mean, how could you not take it personally, right? But it's really not about him. I mean, how could it be, right? It's total strangers in line. So you have to think about alienation the same way. I mean, your kid is telling you, there's something wrong with you. You're a terrible parent. You're a terrible person. And it is very hard not to take that in and not to take it personally, right? It feels very personal. But you have to see it as a family system problem, and your kid's being manipulated. And if you can help not take it personally, you're going to let a lot of it roll off, and you're going to avoid a lot of conflicts. Okay, so that's part one of this, what about the rest of us? What are some solutions? So all of that I just talked about goes in Going Beyond the High Road. A lot of that is in this paper that I wrote called Going Beyond the High Road, surprisingly. All right, so it's available for anybody. I took each of the primary 17 parental alienation strategies and I applied these principles of empathy and problem solving to each of the 17. So what do you do if your ex badmouths you in front of the kids? What do you do if your ex is throwing out mail and blocking contact? What do you do if your ex takes your name off the forms? What do you do if your ex changes your kid's last name to exclude you? How do you apply these principles to those 17 strategies? So, and if you can do that, you'll never deal with alienation again. No, I don't, I can't do that, right? I wish, but it will help. People tell me, oh, it helped. I avoided some fighting with my kid. I had a couple nicer moments with my kid. And really, at this stage, if you're in a, moderately alienated situation, all you want to do, you have one job, is to prevent the moderate to going to severe, right? And so these ideas are ways to stem the tide of the alienation. It's an excellent question. How do you do this and still be true to yourself as a parent? Because I'm not saying, oh, give them whatever they want. Let them stay out all night and party, and who cares about homework? Because kids still want limits, and you as a parent have a moral obligation to set appropriate limits for your kid. But I'm talking about choices within the realm of acceptable. You know what they say about if you can't get your toddler to the bathtub, you say, do you want to fly like an airplane to the bathtub, or do you want to hop like a bunny rabbit? You give them choices. You wouldn't say, would you like $1 million, or you want to skip your bath? So you always give choices that you as a parent can live with, right? So when you're doing that magic wee problem solving, you're not going to say, well, you want a Mercedes-Benz, and I want you to take my beat-up jalopy. How are we going to solve this? And the kid says, give me a Mercedes, give me a Jaguar. And you go, oh, good solution. Why didn't I think of that? You still have to be, a healthy, functioning parent. But if they can come up with something together, if you two together can solve a problem, you are so ahead of the game in terms of alienation. Okay? How you apply this to each specific situation, I couldn't go into now. That's sort of the hard work that you can do in your support groups and in your therapy, is how do I apply these principles to this problem I have today? Okay, so the second part of the what about the rest of us is teaching kids critical thinking skills. All right, so that's my book, little plug. I think most of you know at this point I developed a book. I took each of the 17 primary parental alienation strategies. I put them into kid-friendly language. So instead of saying mom bad mouths dad, that doesn't have a lot of meaning to kids, I say one parent says mean and untrue things to you about the other parent. So each of the 17 was put into kid-friendly language, and it teaches kids critical thinking skills for each of those 17 strategies. And the books are for parents to give to their kids, for therapists to work with kids, and there's even a school-based program of 20 weeks of curriculum for school staff to teach groups of kids critical thinking skills. I'm on the critical thinking skills bandwagon. Well, I brought a couple copies. It's available on my website. It's been out a couple years, so it's newer than Adult Children of Parental Alienation Syndrome, but it's not like hot off the press. All right, but And the reason I'm like so excited about this is when I talk to schools about it, I say, these are the skills you want your kids to be learning anyway. Because you not only do you want them to resist pressure from one parent to reject the other parent, you want them resisting pressure to, join gangs and drop out of school and use drugs, and teaching them critical thinking is like gold. It's what we want every kid to learn how to do, whether they're alienated or not. Pardon? Right. Right. That's true. So this is a way to sort of get it in the back door. Okay, so critical thinking is encouraging kids to look at their thoughts and not assume that every thought that flies through their head is absolute truth. So it's getting kids to think about, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? I mean, this is like, groundbreaking for kids. They're just not used to being taught how to look at their beliefs. And think about if you were teaching history to kids. What's the evidence of this? I'm reading that such and such happened. What's the evidence? Is this the only way to think about this historical event, or are there other ways? So this is really useful information or skills that they can apply to anything in their life. Is there another point of view? What's the evidence? It's like we're teaching them to be scientists, to be rational empiricists. And the point of the I Don't Want to Choose book is not, oh, you think mom's so great and dad's bad? Guess what, kid? You got it wrong. That's not the point of the book. It's not to point any fingers at any parent. The point of the book is kids deserve, you, child, you deserve to have a relationship with both parents, and we're going to teach you how to respectfully step out of your parents' conflict. So we teach kids, what do you do if one parent asks you to take a message to the other parent? What do you do if a parent asks you to spy on the other parent? What do you do if a parent asks you to keep secrets? Do you have a question?
Can I just add one thing? That is exactly the treatment for delusions. That is exactly.
Reality testing.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That dead on accurate.
So we're treating delusions.
You thought I didn't hear it. Can you
That's exactly the right solution for a false belief system. That's exactly what should be happening in therapy.
Right. You heard it here, folks.
Yeah.
But it's also giving kids very specific skills. And the program and the book that is embedded in the program is really teaching them, how do you say to a parent, Mom, I'm just a kid. I don't want to spy on Dad. Or Dad, don't ask me to do spying stuff. I don't want to be a part of that. It's giving them the actual language. They practice it. They role play it. How do you say no to a parent in a respectful way? That's sort of the core of the I Don't Want to Choose program. It's not saying, you're an alienating parent, you're bad, because that's not appropriate to teach kids that. It's to teach kids, hey, I have a right as a child to not be asked to do something that is going to make me that uncomfortable. I don't want to be involved in my parents' conflict, or my conflict between my parent and my sibling. No kid should be put in that position. Mm-hmm. Same thing. It's all, the language in the book is very clear, mom or stepmom, dad or stepdad, because step-parents really make things worse, don't they sometimes? I mean, who would marry an alienating parent, right? I mean, they if they're the dad, the stepdads, they're going to fund it, right? They can really fuel it. Okay, so that's critical thinking. Anybody who wants more information about I Don't Want to Choose, you can get it on my website, you can talk to me. Okay. So I'm going to end in 5 minutes, and then I'll be happy to take more questions. So here's some ideas. This is not I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. This is not like, these are ideas or food for thought, things that you might want to talk about with your attorney about how to craft a court order if you're not going to if you don't have $100,000 to go to court and win the right to go to Family Bridges, and you don't want to stick your kid in individual therapy because that's just, we know that's a dead end, or it can be a dead end. So the assumptions, just to be clear, are that this is alienation and not estrangement. I wouldn't recommend this set of elements that I'm going to talk about for estrangement. So there has to be no abuse or neglect on the part of the targeted parent who is an adequate, if not better, parent. That is, alienation is the problem, not estrangement. And I do believe, from my experience, that we can make alienating parents make their children behave if the alienating parent is incentivized to do so. They can get the kids to school. They get the kids to wear seatbelts and helmets and get vaccinations. And if a kid needed life-saving surgery, I don't think the parent would say, I just can't get them to the doctors. I tried, right? Alienating parents can make their kids do the right thing if they decide they want their kid to do it. So that's the assumption underlying these elements that I'm going to share. Okay, so the first one is authority figures are going to provide a clear and unambiguous message, and in this case I mean the judge. There's other authority figures I bring in later. But the first one is the judge tells the kid, listen kid, you're going to have a relationship with that other parent, and I don't want to hear any more about it. Okay? Something like that. All right? Just, you're going to do it. The second element is we control the behavior of the alienating parent. Okay, so the first thing is they have to be given an exhaustive list of things they can't do, and it ends with anything else that interferes with or undermines the child's relationship with the other parent. Everybody has to know what the no-nos are, okay? And the problem is the court orders, and I know they're not followed, and we can talk about that in a minute. They always talk about they're not supposed to badmouth the other parent, right? Every court order has that. But that's one of 17 parental alienation strategies. We need to control their behavior, and we need to tell them they're not allowed to show up unless it's their parenting time. We need to get them away from the kids as much as possible. And the contact that they have should be audio taped. I've listened to some of the audio tapes between alienating parents and their kids, and it is poison. And I know alienating parents who have lost custody based on how toxic they are, even when they know they're being audio taped. They just can't control themselves. It's just unbelievable. Okay, but it has to all be out there. No hidden avenues, no secret meetings. Everybody needs to see what's going on. Element 3, alienating parent admits his or her role. And you can get them to do this if they think the alternative is they're going to lose custody. Okay, and it doesn't mean that they should say, I'm a bad and terrible, evil, genius person who tried to ruin your relationship. There's no point to that. They need to say, I had a hard time sharing you. I wanted you all to myself. I did things that made it hard for you to have a relationship with the other parent. Okay, so they're taking the kid off the hot seat, saying, I did this, I made it hard, I damaged your relationship, now I'm going to fix it. Okay, and the children must be cooperative and engaged and respectful to the targeted parent by the targeted parent's standards. So there has to be a way for the targeted parent to say, I don't think my kids are warming up to me. Oh, sanctions. So the kids know there's consequences to their behavior. They can't just go to the targeted parent's house and then lock themselves in the bathroom and say, well, I was here. No, they have to be downstairs, being with that other parent, engaged, part of the family. And the targeted parent is the judge of that, nobody else. And the thing that sort of holds it all, oh no, I'm not up to that yet. So third parties, that means the schools, the mental health professionals, the kids therapists, the kids attorneys, the therapists of the alienating parent who are egging on the alienating parent sometimes. Everybody needs to know what the deal is. These kids are alienated and things are going to change. Okay? And then the final thing is, this is the stick here and the carrot. The plan is enforced immediately or else the alienating parent loses time. You know, not every parent has money to lose. I personally am hesitant to say that the alienating parent loses money, but the thing they care the most about is time with their kid. So one way that I've worked this out with people or helped them work it out is they start off with 50-50, and if the kids behave themselves and the alienating parent behaves themselves, then everybody stays with 50-50. If the alienating parent starts doing things they're not supposed to do and the kids aren't warming up and it's not going well, alienating parent loses time. So the alienating parent is invested in the solution because the alternative of losing custody is worse. And judges will like this, I have found in the few cases where I've had the privilege of helping people craft the solution, because it's not some mumbo-jumbo, deprogramming thing that people are afraid Family Bridges is. And it's a little bit more than individual therapy. And it can be positive. It's not punitive, it's positive. It's incentivizing people to behave appropriately. But the thing that makes it all work is if there's an independent third party who oversees the case and is empowered to say, alienating parent, you showed up at the soccer game when you weren't supposed to, you lose next weekend. All right? You have a question? Well, I'm not saying I've done this in hundreds of cases. I haven't. Sometimes it's parenting coordinators. It could be a parenting coach, a grandmaster. Well, this is the end of the whole process of showing that it's alienation, right? I don't think you're going to get a judge to go along with this otherwise, right? Okay, I'm actually done with my presentation, so I'm happy to take a couple questions, right? I think that's it. No, blank screen, I'm done. Okay. I can take some questions. Okay, I'm losing, oh, they're all on this side of the room. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
I have a question about going back to the alienating parent.
Mm-hmm.
What triggers, what motivates? Is it fear, power?
Yes, yes, yes.
What else?
Yes, revenge, narcissism, money, power, personality disorder. I mean, I believe they have personality disorders where they cannot, one way to think about it is once the marriage falls apart, it's a narcissistic injury. That's how clinicians talk about it. So they have to devalue. The only way they can tolerate this is to devalue the other parent. Oh, they're really crap, garbage. Of course, I don't really feel badly. The marriage is over. And then they think, well, if I think that person's so bad, how could my kids possibly get anything out of that relationship? So that's one. I know that's sort of a dramatic condensation of things. But it's basically an inability to understand that their children have separate needs and experiences and feelings than they have. So once they devalue that person, then of course the kids are going to devalue them as well. We're not going to design a study where we say you're going to get treatment and we're going to see if that works, and we're just going to let you languish being an alienated kid and see how horrible it is. We've done naturalistic research. That's what my book is. What happens to these kids in the absence of treatment? We know for some kids, it's really bad news. I think comparing different treatment solutions would be very interesting. There's no money. Nobody's funding that kind of research. In my research of the 40 people that I studied, the question was, why do some kids succumb to the alienation and others don't? Okay, so I'm going to just put it in the reverse just to talk about it for a minute. In my research of the 40 adults, all of whom had the realization and reconnected and came through the other side, they all had siblings who hadn't yet. And so we don't know the answer to what are all the forces that lead some siblings to become alienated while others are more inoculated against it. And then we also don't know why do some kids have the realization and outgrow the alienation and others don't. But I would guess for the first question, a lot of it is probably age, gender, affinity with the alienating parent, right? Temperament. There's all of those factors. And it's a great question because prevention it would be so great if we could say, well, in cases where there's a child of this age and this gender and this family, firstborn girls of alienating fathers are more likely to become alienated, and we could put our resources to protecting them. We don't know the answer yet. So how do you deal with the fact that forcing your child to spend time with you creates conflict? And I was saying earlier, try to avoid conflict. But let me say that if you said, oh well, you don't want to come, don't come, then you're accused of abandoning your child. And if you pursue them, you're a stalker. So when it comes to the relationship, capital R, I think you have to fight for the relationship, and that's what your kids will remember. But while you have them, you could say to them, gee, we have a problem because you'd like to skip on visitation, but I'm not going to let you do that. What can we do to make this a better time for us now that we're together? So use the problem solving, remember giving them reasonable choices. They don't get to choose whether to come, but what would you like to do now that you're here?
Even if they're older, is there an age or is it
I don't think so, no. My opinion. Okay, but now I'm going here.
I have a really hard time understanding still why there's so much resistance against this whole concept to the point where it's stigmatized. I can understand that one problem is people abuse it as a smokescreen, like true abusers abuse it as a smokescreen to hide behind in their own defense. But still, it seems like it's so pervasive and legitimate. Why, do you have any idea why it gets such a backlash?
How much time do we have? I mean, that's a tall order to go into. I mean, there's the feminist ideology, there's the money issue, there's the you must have done something if you've lost your kid. So I think there's psychological reasons, there's financial reasons, there's gender politics reasons. What? Farwellians?
Male power dominating.
Right, there's the people who, there's so many forces, I think, that converge. And then there's Gardner, who was imperfect himself. He's sort of like the ideal targeted parent, you know, he's imperfect, like all targeted parents. And so they find the things that he was not perfect on, and that gets latched onto. Well, you're probably court ordered not to show them the court document, right? So I think your hands are tied. I would go back to the empathy. I think that in that sense, the science might be a bit of a cover and say, gee, you're wondering if I stole your money, that must really hurt. And you can say, I would not do that, you know. I don't know. I'd have to think about it, but I think there are ways other than showing a court document to a child to, what they want to know is, do you love me? Are you safe? Are you available? Are you loving? And you can show that to yourself. And I think that's what you could say. By asking that question, you're wondering if I'm the kind of parent who would have done that. And let's talk about that. You know, I don't know how to do that, but maybe Alex has some ideas. But peer support is a very big part of the I Don't Want to Choose program. And the idea is, hey, we're all kids, all our parents are divorced, we're all sort of muddling through this, and they can, that's built into the program. But the kids, you know, alienated kids, they need permission to have a relationship. And once you give them that permission, I mean, I'm not going to say all kids forever, but I know many, many, many cases where you just get them away from the alienating parent and you put them with the targeted parent, and they can be fine. You know, and I have seen that in cases that I've worked on. So, well, it depends on what if you've had 50, you have to sort of figure out what the judge is comfortable with and what you've had. If what you have is 50-50 and the judge doesn't want to change it, you say, great, let's stay with 50-50, but let's incentivize the alienating parent to not do something that's going to jeopardize that. So you have to kind of figure out where the judge is coming from. So I think that's the last question, and then I'm going to sign books. So thank you.